Chicago for computer science majors, and I had small group meetings with all of them over the course of the semester. And when I moved into this office, I had this really big board and nothing to put on it because I don't really use a board. So I started asking every student who came in if they wanted to answer the question, how do you know you're not a computer? It's very early in the semester, so there are only a couple of answers up. I've only had 2 meetings so far. But by the end of the semester, it's going to be covered with different people's answers.
Well, let me welcome everyone to this week's Keeping Current seminar. Today, in honor of the fact that we have 3 chairs in our department, we'll have 2 talks with multiple people speaking. So the first is about ethics in computer science, and we have a tricep speaking. We have Dr. Goldsmith and Mandy Burton, whom you can see there, and Beth Goldstein, who's waiting in the wings. And feel free to walk around the next piece.
I waded through the wings, is what you did. So let me tell you a little bit about the project that's behind this particular presentation, which we will also be doing at the Computer Science Ethics Conference. So Dr. Burton and I both teach science fiction and computer ethics, and we are asked occasionally, does it work? Do the students learn what we want them to learn? So what we need to do is apply use an assessment tool to see what students have learned. Except when we look at it, the assessment tools that are there don't measure what we want. They're not focused on descriptive ethics in particular, which Dr. Burton is going to talk about in a minute. So we have a pending proposal at NSF to develop an assessment tool that actually assesses what we think we're teaching so we can find out. But we need input from the rest of the community because we want other people to also use the tool so we can compare our methods with other. Mandy?
Yes?
You're on.
I'm on. Fantastic. Hello. Okay, so the goal of many CS ethics classes is to expose students to important ethical issues in the field. That's something that we tend to refer to as issues literacy, right? Are you aware of algorithmic bias? Are you aware of mass surveillance practices? This is certainly important, but it's not enough. It's just as important to equip the students to be able to reason carefully and coachingly about these issues when they arise. And even before that, to spot them as they are coming, to see them emerging from developing work. Computer science is a rapidly changing field. The world is obviously being changed along with it, and that means that it's not possible to give students a comprehensive list of the issues they're going to confront, a rubric for what those issues are going to look like when they show up, and a rule set to follow when that happens. We need to give them tools and concepts in order to engage in ethical deliberation and reasoning and decision-making on their own. The thing is, everything I've said, none of that is controversial. Pretty much anyone who's taught ethics or even really put a lot of time into trying to work through some sort of ethical conundrum with a group is going to know that ethics is a contact sport. Ethical decision-making is a different kind of problem-solving. It's not purely intellectual. It draws on lots of parts of the person. And so the question is not whether to try to cultivate these reasoning capacities, but how you do it. There is an obvious solution. What's less obvious is how to use it, and that solution is ethical theory, right? There's a long history of scholarship and philosophy on, the study of ethics. How do you live well? How do you make good decisions? And most ethics classes do incorporate 3 major theories that dominate sort of the Western imaginary. I'll say a little more about them later: utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and deontology. But they don't always fit in neatly. They don't always really accomplish very much. And part of what we're arguing is that in order to know what tools and concepts are necessary, how you can use these theories, it helps to break down the task of ethical reasoning, to understand what it is that you are trying to do when you reason, and then it'll be easier to use those theoretical tools. Now, broadly speaking, the task of ethical reasoning has 2 parts. first, a person has to recognize and interpret the situation in front of them. And secondly, they have to be able to make appropriate and well-considered judgments about those situations. Most accounts of ethical reasoning, they skip straight to the making judgments part. The part where you know what's going on and you have to figure out what you should do in response to it. That part, the part where you make value-informed judgments about what one should do, about what the world should be like, that is what's called normative ethics, because it's rooted in norms, in evaluative standards, right? You're not just saying, well, here's what's going on. You're saying, there's an ideal or a better way for the world to be, and I am going to work to bring it toward that thing that is better, or other people should work to bring it toward that thing that is better. And when we teach different kinds of ethical theory, a big part of what we are teaching is that there are multiple ways to construct those evaluative standards. It's not just a matter of saying, right, is this good outcome more important than that good outcome? It's also saying, is thinking in terms of outcome the right framework? Should we instead be thinking about this in terms of people's basic rights? Should we instead be thinking about how a given technology or shift in the sort of technological social norms are going to affect the conditions for human happiness and self-understanding, right? By the way, I've just given you a super quick showcase of the different theories, taking you through. The first one was utilitarianism, which is about outcomes. Deontology is about norms and duties and rules. Virtue ethics thinks about the basic conditions of personhood and how we become who we are. And as you can see, they offer really profoundly different perspectives on what counts as a good ethical decision and why. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison. And one really valuable thing that an ethics class can do, just by teaching students to think in these different normative paradigms, is to introduce them to the idea that there are multiple ways of thinking about what is good and what is valuable, and that different situations will be better served by using different normative frameworks. And that's good. That's a good start. But we need to go back to something more fundamental prior to that. Because while it is essential for ethics, for a person to be thoughtful about how you make a normative judgment, that's not the full picture of what ethical reasoning requires. Because any evaluation of a given situation is rooted in a description of what that situation is in the first place, right? You cannot make a judgment about how best to respond to a situation until you've reached some kind of conclusion about what it is. And you will know, if you've ever tried to give a balanced explanation of a complex ethical disagreement, that there's more than one way to describe a situation. A really quick example would be thinking about predictive policing. Is predictive policing about efficiency? Is it about managing resources well? Is it about reproducing long-standing social bias, right? There are different, people obviously have really different views on the social value of predictive policing, and a lot of those values are rooted in their foundational sense of how you talk about what predictive policing is in the first place. Description is also a part of ethical reasoning, and it's something that can and should be done in a thoughtful way that is informed by multiple critical perspectives. Now, ethical theory can do more than just give us different ways of making normative judgments. It can give us different ways of doing that descriptive work. Now, if you'll recall, I talked briefly about how utilitarianism thinks in terms of outcomes. Deontology is organized around duties and rights, and virtue ethics is thinking about how the person is shaped in society. If you can think about those not only as criteria for making judgments, but as a kind of template for evidence gathering, right? What are you looking at in the first place? What are you paying attention to when you try to constitute a picture of what is going on in the situation that you are evaluating? There are some kinds of problems that don't even become visible as problems if you're only using one perspective, right? If you're only thinking about duties and rights, maybe you won't be prepared to think about the ways in which somebody might game a new system that you're building and create some unfortunate outcomes. If you're only thinking about outcomes, maybe you are not paying attention to the texture of how people's lives are changing in small ways in response to what you're doing. So that's a very brief overview of what descriptive ethics can accomplish in combination with normative ethics. As you can see, they're pretty deeply integrated into one another. We still think it's really valuable to distinguish them so that you can pay attention to both parts of the operation.
Thank you very much, Dr. What we often do in our classes, and by often I mean half of the time in class, is break up into small groups to discuss ideas. What we would like to do now is break up into small groups. Dr. Goldstein will give us a prompt, something to discuss, and then we'll have a couple of minutes, very briefly at the end, to report back. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce myself just very briefly as part of giving you a prompt to work with. The team that Dr. Goldsmith referred to, that includes Dr. Burton and myself and several other people, is comprised of people who have expertise in ethics, people who have expertise in computer science, and a group of us from education who have expertise in thinking about what constitutes knowledge, how we create knowledge, what constitutes learning, and in particular processes of learning, and then how we go about assessing what people are learning and how they're learning it. And so together we're trying to co-construct what assessments around ethical learning and ethical reasoning in computer science would look like. So the prompt for today is to have you help us start to generate some of the student learning outcomes that we should be attentive to for ethical reasoning in computer science education. And I don't know, Judy, if there's a way we can eventually display this, take it onto the screen for people, but let me read it out to you and then we'll try and find a way to display it. What we're going to ask you to do is to divide up into small groups of 4 to 6 people, no more than 6 people in a group. I have paper and pens for you here. Within your group, we want you to identify a specific computer ethics problem. That's number 1. Identify the problem. And then we would like you to consider what you would want computer science students to learn in a computer ethics class so that they are able to consider the ethical issues of that problem. We'd like you to make a list to, on the top of the paper, write down the ethics problem, the computer ethics problem, and then below that, list the desired learnings as a set of student learning outcomes. All right, is that clear? So first you're going to identify a problem of computer ethics, and then you're going to think about what you would want students to learn in a CS ethics course in order to be able to think ethically, do ethical reasoning with that problem. That constitutes your list of student learning outcomes. So go ahead and what is the time? 12 minutes?
Yeah.
12 minutes.
So you may want to stand up and
Move
move around.
around, or this is a non-space assignment.
This is Jean McVeigh. He's got one of the department chairs. And Liz is with our Office of Technology Commercialization. For that, she was at TechScience Technology Corporation and Aspen Please. Ted, you want to be with us?
Sure, I'll do it here.
Okay. Who's next? Liz now?
Whatever you're doing right now, we're going to get back together.
Yeah, so you also get to use spokesperson.
Please have a seat again. Or stand if you want.
I didn't realize that this was being recorded, video and audio, so I won't shout at you anymore. I thought I was using my teacher voice. All right, so We are going to collect your sheets of paper. Thank you very much. We're not going to take the time now to go through all of what you've generated for a couple of reasons. One, because there's really not enough time to go through that well, and two, because each of your lists are situated in the context of the problem that you decided to think about. But we can compile these and post them if the group thinks that would be interesting. What I'd like to spend the last few minutes talking about is to ask you to share what challenges you found in doing this exercise. So what were the challenges in trying to, not to identify the problem, but once you identified a problem, what were your challenges in coming up with a list of student learning outcomes that you thought would be associated with it? Yes.
We hadn't studied any of these issues really formally before, so we didn't have the language often to really know what we wanted to say precisely.
Thank you.
Coming up with a specific enough problem to actually start thinking about what you want to learn about it.
On the other side, from what Aiden was saying, it is hard to abstract to a concise, precise description of what you want to say that is actually detached from a specific problem.
So our group will have a discussion, when should the student learn the ethics? Is it before they could program or after they are able to program?
So I think I kind of struggled with was, okay, I want students to be able to consider the ethical issues of such a problem. Is that the end? Is that the goal? It seems like there ought to be maybe a meta goal beyond that or something. What do we want that? Okay, they can consider it, but then what happens after that?
I don't have now another contribution to this specific question, I think, perhaps, because what I'm struggling all the time, microphone, what I'm struggling with all the time is to really understand a broader question. Where all this really belongs, should it be specific to computer scientists and so on? So are there courses in ethics for teachers? I know that there is code of ethics in teaching or for education. There are many organizations that speak about codes of ethics and ethical expectations for teachers. I am not sure if our College of Education has classes ethics for teachers. If it does, I would like to hear about them, because that would be a good context for me. I would be learning about how the problem was approached in an extremely important setting, when people deal with future teachers and therefore deal with people who will be educating new generations of people. And then I would have probably a better grasp and a better context for how to structure thinking about ethics for computer scientists. I cannot simply imagine that we will have ethics for computer scientists, physicists, and math teachers. There's something amiss here or something wrong here when we speak about ethics for computer scientists or computer science.
Last words?
I want to thank you for your input today, and we'll have a conversation about that later. I hope that you will eventually welcome us back again, because as we work through this project, we'll be trying to generate a list of learning outcomes that address both descriptive and normative aspects of ethical reasoning. And we'd like to bring it back to you at some point and think about, how do we know when we've learned to use these? Right? And how do we embed that within the curriculum? How does it fit into the sequence of learning that happens in any curriculum, whether it's computer science or education or business or other curriculum, because we're all responsible for ethical reasoning in our